Minister has a busy morning, but nevertheless, he has indicated that he would like to engage with the audience, and he has readily availed himself for a question and answer session. So we're very happy to take a few questions from the floor, and maybe I can start the Q&A session now. If you can keep your questions short, and if I can invite you to introduce yourself before you pose your question. So can I have the first question, please? Yes, Rohan. Are there microphones around? Yeah, it's coming up.
Thank you, Minister Shanmugam. Would you be kind to share with us the impact of the Gaza conflict in Singapore and in the region? What is the global impact it is creating outside Gaza, and how does governments and how should governments respond to mitigate the threat? Because many of the developments in the Middle East is now affecting regions beyond the Middle East. Thank you very much for your presence. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Rohan. I'm not qualified to speak about the rest of the world, but speaking a little bit about Singapore and maybe based on some knowledge on this region, I would say you can look at the impact at least on three levels. First, at the macro level across society, there is a sense of partly helplessness, but also a sense, I would say, of revulsion at the scale of the civilian lives being lost through very, what appear to be very directed and targeted actions against civilians. The Palestinians being herded into smaller and smaller spaces, and the attacks on the West Bank, and the further actions that are being taken. I think fair to say across religious and racial groups, there is a very high degree of negative feeling, revulsion, I would say, towards that. Then, if you go down to the second level, survey after survey shows that the Muslim communities in the region are even more affected. They pay greater attention, and they follow events much more closely, but they also are very angry about what's happening. At the third level, which would then be directly relevant to, say, someone like me, the transition from that to people wanting to do something violent about it, either by going over to the Middle East or doing something in Singapore. We have seen some of it. Singapore is perhaps slightly different from other places because we have, as you know, Rohan, powers to order the detention of people even as they are thinking about these things. I can sign an order detaining. To my significant concern, I am ordering the detention of persons as young as 16 and 17. Not that many. Still, you can count them in the fingers of one or two hands. But the fact that, we are picking up 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds tells you that there is a growing feeling, a significantly growing feeling. It's obvious. So there is the threat of terrorism and people wanting to take things into their own hands. I am sure that feeling is perhaps greater in the other countries, but it's not an insignificant feeling within Singapore. So I would, in broad terms, put it in these three levels, but don't underestimate the feelings that non-Muslims, particularly younger people, have as to the events that are taking place and how they view Israel. mean, in my lifetime, one of the most significant shifts that I've seen in neutral public opinion is how Israel has been viewed as a beacon of democracy and a shining light, and as the underdog, which is being unfairly targeted, to now a completely opposite picture. And that change has taken place in a period of something like 40 years or so.
Anthony?
Just go ahead.
Thank you for supporting MEI all these years in all its conferences and seminars. I have a follow-up question to Rohan, and that has to do with Indonesia. We recently had a speaker from Indonesia Policy Tank, Rico Masbun, who is a graduate of RSIS under Ambassador Barry Desker. And he tracks the opinions of Indonesians. And what is quite remarkable is the percentage of Indonesians, probably younger, their thoughts of Israel is changing quite radically, almost to the 50% level. How do we take into account of that? Because Indonesia is very important to us and to the Middle East. Thank you.
It's one facet, albeit a very important facet, of what I've just described. I did say that in the region, the feelings are probably deeper, and I'm surprised it's only at 50%. I would have expected it to be more. And this is a country with a population of 270 million. 98% of whom are Muslim, and a country that I think matters on the world stage, and a country with whom Israel would have normally hoped for a good relationship. The fact that international opinion is changing quite substantially, and I don't think you need to look at Indonesia for that. I think you can look at Western Europe for that, and even the United States at the public opinion level. It does, for policymakers in the security domain, it does give cause for concern in that if a significant amount of the population moves in this direction, then you can expect a certain percentage of them to be 2 or 3 standard deviations, even more to the right. And they are the people you worry about in the context of violence. And in such a large population, there is cause for concern both for them and for us.
Ma'am?
Yes, please.
Minister, Barbara Lee, Ambassador Barbara Lee, Washington, D.C. I served in the previous administration quite a bit. And as bad as it was at the transition point of U.S. administrations, safe to say it is profoundly worse. Going to your comments about the security dimension, the impact of the conflict here in Singapore, but also across other regions, how do you make this point most effectively to the Trump administration? And I'm thinking of the upcoming sessions at the UN.
How do you make points to the Trump administration? I think if someone can advise me on that, I think you are better placed, and maybe Ashok Kumar, recently retired ambassador to Washington, were probably in a better position to advise. Look, on this specific issue, your administration, the Biden administration, had its significant differences with Israel. You were in a position to, and probably the only country in the world which is in a position to actually dictate Israel's actions. But you couldn't, despite your president's significant concerns and differences of opinion with Israeli actions and the Israeli Prime Minister. in the end, you went along with what Israel did, despite making your unhappiness clear. And that's the Biden administration. The Trump administration, the current administration, does not have as many differences as the Biden administration had, but nevertheless, it does have differences. I don't think that Trump, based on what I read of the current administration's policies, it's not 100% aligned with what Israel is doing. There are some significant differences. Less so than the previous administration, but there are. But nevertheless, the United States has not taken any action to, as far as I can tell, any significant action to prevent or change Israel's course of action or trajectory. And who do you think is best placed to advise the administration that that trajectory should be changed? And second, do we realistically believe that countries like Singapore or even larger countries can overcome American viewpoints which have been pretty much set in concrete over 60, 70 years? There's a certain trajectory to the American actions vis-a-vis Israel, and one of which is fundamentally to go along with almost anything that Israel does. And I'm not realistically a believer that we can alter that course. If you think of a group of countries that can do something about it, perhaps the countries in the Middle East could possibly have some influence. I don't know. That's the best answer I can give you. And there are some ambassadors or representatives here from Middle Eastern countries, and they might be able to give you a better view as to whether they will come together and say anything to the US administration. But I don't think anyone is holding his or her breath on that.
Thank you. Further questions? Yes, sir.
Very good morning, Mr. Shanmugam and Professor Joseph. Thank you for your time. It's a privilege to be here. My name is Mahajuna, and one question I would like to ask is, what's your opinions on the Hamas rejecting US control of Gaza?
Come again. Hamas rejecting US
Control of Gaza.
See, Hamas is an organization that in its charter up to today talks about a Palestinian state from the river to the sea, which basically means the obliteration of Israel. And so the Israelis quite naturally say they can have no dealings with Hamas, and Hamas needs to be completely obliterated. Whether it's going to be possible, I mean, even if you kill every single person who is identified as a Hamas operative today, the idea behind Hamas, the idea, particularly the central idea of a Palestinian state, can you really kill it? Even if you kill every single Palestinian today, can you kill that idea? Which is why I don't believe that history will judge that Israel's actions were either wise or right. So you cannot, I think, completely finish off the idea of a Palestinian state. Maybe today Israeli public opinion and Israeli leadership think that in the very difficult environment they find themselves, that's the only solution. People looking on it from outside, even including friends of Israel, are entitled and I think often take a different view. Hamas, if you go back a little bit, I tell people in Singapore when I talk to them in the last year and a half, 2 years, that it's difficult to find a non-villain in the piece. You have Hamas, and then you have countries which, or at least one country that used Hamas very cynically and supported it. But look, the Israeli administration quite clearly also supported Hamas. Because as long as Hamas was alive and controlling Gaza, Israel could say, look, this is a terrorist organization in charge of Gaza, and how can we have a two-state solution? It's a completely cynical calculation, but cynicism was not restricted to Israel. It's also on the part of Iran, which openly, I think, believes that the more people who die in Palestine, the weaker US and Israel will be. And from Iran's calculation, I'm not sure that Palestine or the lives of Palestinians is the most important thing. It is really the leadership of the Islamic world. And leadership of the Islamic world means preventing the Americans from giving any guarantees to Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and preventing a deeper and a closer relationship with these countries. And how do you do that? By putting the Palestinian issue front and center in everybody's minds, which will then derail any possible greater cooperation between Saudi Arabia, UAE, others in the region, and the United States, which would then, in the Iranian calculations, make Iran a more central actor, a more powerful actor. So whether you look at Hamas, whether you look at Israel, whether you look at Iran, it's difficult to find heroes in this picture. Everyone has his or her own cynical calculations. And I think no one has really seriously tried to have a just solution for the Palestinian question.
Okay. In the interest of time, I'm going to take two final questions from the floor, and then I'm going to have the last question. So at the back there, one, and over here, there's a question as well.
Hi, good morning, Minister. My name is Fayaz. I have a question about what has been happening lately, especially with several countries, including the UK, France, and even Australia, planning to recognize Palestine in upcoming UN General Assembly. And my question is, do you think that there is a possibility that trying to recognize Palestine would put us one step closer to establishing the two-state solution? And if so, what conditions must be met in order for countries, and more countries, including Singapore, to recognize Palestine formally?
You need to divide actions between those which are purely performative and those which are going to have some impact. So I think Europe or European countries recognizing Palestine is probably in a different order from, say, a country like Singapore recognizing Palestine. But let's say for the time being, some countries in Europe recognize Palestine. Do they have the power to alter the course of actions in Gaza or the West Bank? I mean, I said just now, there's only one country that probably can have, that has that power, and that's the United States. I don't think Europe has that power. I don't think the countries, Middle Eastern countries around Israel have that power. They may have some influence on the United States, but only the US can alter this course. And even then, I'm not sure that it can completely do so, given its own political realities within the United States. And the fact that Israel might just say no to the United States too. So then you have to ask whether recognizing Palestine today immediately, where there is no viable government and there is no viable two-state solution, hurts or advances the Palestinian cause. You recognize what counteractions do you expect, and how do you think that it's going to actually change facts on the ground. My suggestion to you is it's not going to change it in favor of the Palestinians. It's likely to harm them even more, realistically. You need some physical space, which Israel is doing its best to prevent. You need a population which now in the current actions seem designed to, destroy a large part of that population or move them out of Gaza. And 3, you need a viable government. And I don't see either the Palestinian Authority or anyone else today having the wherewithal. What it really means is supporting the Palestinian Authority, giving them legitimacy, and building them up to a stage where they can govern. But again, the fact on the ground, I think, prevent the international community from doing that. So international community, you have one group which will have nothing to do with Israel, and Israel will of course ignore them as well. Then you have a second group, countries which want a just solution but are friendly to Israel. I think today Israel's administration largely ignores them too. And then you have the United States.
Sir, Carl.
Minister, thank you for your remarks. I just have one question related to this one. There have been calls for Singapore to take a more firm stance, to downgrade or, even break relations with Israel to show our disapproval for their actions. What do you make of this approach?
When you talk about breaking off relations, I think you've got to start off with what is in our interests, what are the facts, and what does that potentially lead to, right? And can it change the course of actions? Now, since the 7th October and Israel's actions, I think there is no doubt in anybody's mind that many of them have been wrong. The numbers vary, but probably 60,000 people have been killed. 1/3 of them probably children, reportedly. There's starvation. I think 20,000 have been admitted to centers for malnutrition. You have 60% of the buildings in Gaza apparently destroyed, including 90% of the homes and others, hospitals, mosques, cultural centers. 90% of the population of Gaza, nearly 2 million, has been displaced, and Israel is expanding its military operations even further. Now, I think it's difficult to describe it in words, the misery and the scale of destruction, but at least I think quite clearly this is not acceptable. I refer to what our Prime Minister said in May, and since then more unspeakable acts have been committed. And we, like many others, say, even though it looks like a forlorn hope, that a two-state solution is the only path, and that's been our position for many years, right? And we reiterate it. Supposing we go further, what do you think we can do? Is there something we can do usefully? First of all, it's not that we've been doing nothing and just giving words, Since the start of the conflict, Singapore has delivered many tranches of aid to Gaza, humanitarian assistance. Just a few weeks ago, 12th of August, we delivered our 9th tranche, RSAF, a C-130 transport aircraft, to airdrop humanitarian aid, including medical supplies and food supplies. I think more than $20 million worth of assistance has been sent over to Gaza, and we are among the top contributors. And I'm not talking about per capita, we are among the top contributors in ASEAN in terms of aid to Gaza. And we also work with regional partners, UNICEF, United Nations, RWA, to do what we can to help. And capacity building sounds absurd right now in this context, but there is an enhanced technical assistance package. More than 800 Palestinian officials have benefited from training courses, study visits in public administration, digitalization, public health. We also intend to launch 2 new initiatives next year. We're going to work with Japan to train Palestinian civil police officers. We're going to launch a Young Leaders Program to share our experiences in public administration. And in the longer term, we are committed to contributing to the reconstruction of Gaza once a permanent ceasefire agreement is reached. Now, none of this, these are all real, these are all important. Unfortunately, none of them can be put in a single headline that will attract eyeballs, because this requires explanation and understanding, because this is serious work, this is hard work. Breaking of relations is very easy for people to sell, it's performative. First, if we cut off or reduce ties with Israel, would that be consistent? Because if we did that, we have to be consistent about doing that with others in a similar position. So you got to look around the world. You look at the Syrian civil war going on the last 15 years. Maybe now there's a little bit more peace. More than 500,000 people have been killed. Almost 10 times the number who have been killed in Gaza. 14 million displaced. If you take the approach that you have to cut off ties with people who commit humanitarian breaches, then I think there are many actors in the Syrian civil war who qualify, including those who supply arms, and several of them are P5 countries. To be consistent, we should be cutting off ties with them. And the other countries which took part in the civil war, likewise, because they are responsible for the civilian deaths, we should be cutting off ties with them too, if you want to be consistent. If you take the Yemen civil war, 2015 onwards, hundreds of thousands killed, 5 million displaced, 20 million depend on aid to survive, 1 in 2 children severely malnourished. There are several actors who are responsible or who could be said to be responsible for this. Should we be cutting off ties with all of them? I don't see many calls for that. You look at who they are. They include P5 countries. They include countries in the region. So I'm not pointing to any specific actor, but you can argue it's country A, country B, country C. Do we declare and say we take a policy of cutting off ties with everyone who is in breach of international law? You have the Myanmar civil war, economic collapse, 3.5 million people displaced, 20 million in need of humanitarian assistance, credible reports of the government bombing its own civilians. Do we cut off ties with Myanmar? Or do we cut off ties with the countries which supply them with weapons? You need to be consistent, right? Your foreign policy. Or you take Russia. Russia-Ukrainian war, more than 1 million casualties, 12 million Ukrainians in need of humanitarian assistance, 2 million children. Should we be cutting off ties with Russia? Why not? If you want to cut off ties with Israel, you should be cutting off ties with Russia, and on the basis of what I just outlined, we should be cutting off ties with the United States, France, Britain, all of whom have been supplying weapons to many of these conflicts. We won't have anyone in the P5 with whom we'll have a diplomatic relationship with if you apply it consistently and not emotionally. Bad as they are, the casualties, and no one can justify them, the point is equally bad or worse things are happening around the world, and our approach has to be consistent to all of them. And the second point, so we cut off ties with Israel. How is that going to help the people of Gaza? How does that give us any hope of continuing to speak with the Israeli government and putting forward our viewpoints. We are not the most significant player in terms of Israel government opinion, but we are not completely insignificant because of the long relationship. If we speak, they do listen, as long as we are sensible. It doesn't mean they follow, but at least they listen. You cut it off, how does it help the Palestinians? Really, you can get angry, but foreign policy has got to be based on a more realistic and unemotional, non-emotional calculation. And if you take that approach, you survey around the world, and then you say, realistically, there is only one power that can deal with Israel, and that's not Singapore. That's not Britain, that's not France, that's not Germany. And which means that you accept that there are limitations on what you can do. And you work within that framework and you explain your position to your population. I think that's the best answer I can give you.
Okay, Minister, if I can exercise my prerogative chairing this dialogue with the last question. I think it's understandable we're all seized with the Palestinian issue and Gaza in particular. But if I invite you to just take a step back, look at the Middle East, what do you think some of the key trends you think we should keep an eye on?
Taking a security focus, or rather you take one step back, before 7 October, I think there were many developments that were cause for optimism in a region that has been long beset with conflict. If you looked at Saudi Arabia, the sweeping changes that was giving new vigor to the economy, adding new aspects to the economy, women in the workforce. 2 visits 3 years apart, and I could see the difference. It was so dynamic. The changes were so apparent. And trying to move out of a pure resource-based economy to doing many other things. United Arab Emirates, you see how they are also trying to move out, moving into technology with, limitations because of the small population, but doing their best, and they're blessed with money, so, they can try and do the best they can to bring in expertise. We are a small country, small population, we are doing reasonably well. So others can do too, and UAE was making significant strides. Oman, others, if peace had continued, you had every hope that that trajectory would have continued. The 7 October conflict derailed a lot of, I won't say perhaps derailed, but affected, I think, by bringing the Palestinian question to the center and in some ways putting a pall over the continued progress. But I have no doubt those countries will continue to progress and do their best economically, and that should not be forgotten. But the conflict has the potential to radicalize sections of the population, perhaps even large sections of the population, or at least make them more resistant to, say, changes in other fields. I don't know, I speak as an outsider. So that's one concern. And as long as you don't have a just solution for the Palestinian question, then you have to ask whether Israel can live in peace with its own significant Arab population within its borders, and whether the region can put this aside and move on and have economic progress for the benefit of its people, or whether this question will keep coming back as long as you don't have a just solution. And it then allows other countries within the region, including Iran, to try and influence actions in one way or another more favorable to them. So you have a problem there. It becomes a very cloudy, very mixed picture. I'm still optimistic about the progress of the rest of the region in that area. Some faster, some slower. But I don't underestimate that the impact this war will have to inflame public opinion and affect the support of the public for other measures. It's not easy to say.
Thank you, Minister. And I would like now to draw this opening session to a close. I think you all agree with me that Minister, apart from being very generous with his time, but also very candid in his engagement and response to all these questions. Difficult issues, and we have distinguished speakers who will share their perspectives over the course of today and help us unpack and unravel some of these issues as well. But at any rate, for now, let me just invite all of us to thank Minister for his remarks this morning. Thank you.